Hey everybody, it's Julian or Flow Graphics here, and welcome to another Photoshop tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create isometric pixel art. So like you can see on my screen right now, this is something I quickly whipped up for this video. So I'm going to be showing you the techniques on how to actually create the isometric view, sort of make some isometric cubes and whatnot, and how to actually start to texture them, make them into buildings, and also teach you some stuff about shading and lighting so you can make things like the tree and the house and whatnot. So yeah, let's just get straight into it. I'm just going to open up, I'll just close this document first. I'm just going to open up a new document. So we're working with pixel art here, so we can make it pretty small. I'm just going to make it, let's say 80 by 80 pixels. Just an RGB 8-bit color is great for me. So I'm going to hit OK. So once you got your document open, I'm just going to hit Control+. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Now, whenever I make pixel art, I like to work with a darker background. For some reason, I don't like staring at bright white background. So I'm just going to double click on this background layer, make it into a normal layer, hit Control U, and I'm just going to make it nice and dark, so like a sort of a bit sort of nicer, easier to look at, I think. So before we get into this, something that's really important with pixel art is your color palette. So like you can see in the top right hand corner of my Photoshop, I have some sort of color swatches that I've made. So this is actually sort of like a custom color swatch palette, or color palette that I've made specifically for a game that I'm working on. I'm making sort of like a retro pixel arty game at the moment, and these colors work really well for that. So I'm just going to use these colors here. And something that I'm going to do for all of you is actually leave a download link to this actual color swatch, this specific color palette. So with color palettes, it's not just as straightforward as just picking colors and using them. There's actually specific ways that you sort of can use the certain colors to make it look better. So I'll leave a download to that, and if you want to follow along exactly, you can actually use the exact colors that I'm using. So let's just get straight into it. So we've made a new document. One thing I'm going to say, I always say this about all my pixel art tutorials, if you have a pixel grid and you don't like it, you can go View, Show, and then Pixel Grid, and it'll come up with this pixel grid. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. If you do like it, you can turn it on. I don't use it because it's just sort of annoying, so I'm going to turn it off. But first thing, let's create an actual sort of the angle that we're going to create our isometric sort of view at. So I'm just going to create a new layer here. I'm going to go to my brush tool. Make sure you're in your pencil tool. So just hit B on your keyboard, click and hold on a little icon, and we got our pencil tool. So it's going to click on that. So that's how you make pixel art. You got to use a pencil tool. Otherwise, the brush, you can see, even if you've got the hardness all the way up at 0 and it's nice and small, it still has this sort of weird rough edge. So we're going to just use a pencil tool here. So the first thing is creating our actual sort of isometric tile. So we get to choose whatever angle we want to work with now. So I'm just going to turn on my rulers, so View, Rulers, so I've got these, and I can just going to click and drag out these rulers to make some guides so I can see sort of the exact center of my document. So what I can do now is, whilst selected on my sort of pencil tool, I can click, I'm going to hold Shift and then click again, basically just to make a diagonal line. Sometimes when you have the guides, it doesn't like to do, it sort of snaps into the guides. So I'm just going to turn the guides off for a second. And all I'm doing now is just making a diagonal line, holding Shift, going from one side of the document to the other. Again, these guides are really annoying sometimes because it actually snaps to them. All I needed them for was just to make this diagonal line right here though, so I can turn them off. If you don't know how I'm hiding them and showing them, it's just Control semicolon. Sort of to the right of your L key, just Control that hides it and shows it. So right now I'm just going to hit Control J to duplicate this line. I'm going to hit Control T to open the transform, right click, flip vertical, enter. So a few commands to remember there, but all I did that for is so I can now flip the line. And if you don't know what we're doing here, we're making a tile, so we're making a diamond. So I'm just going to hit Control E, combine them together, hit Control J to duplicate it, Control T to transform it again, right click, flip horizontal, and then we're going to move that over here. So we just made a perfect little diamond, and then Control E to merge it again. So I'm just going to fill this with a color now, hit my paint bucket tool, and just click the center of that. Something to know is if when you filled it, it sort of made it bigger by a block, probably because anti-aliasing's turned on, so you can just turn that off on your bucket tool, and it won't sort of add any extra fill. So now I've got a tile here. So this would basically be an exact sort of like top-down look of our scene, I guess. So what we can do is hit Control T or Command T, whatever you're using. If you hold Alt, if you didn't know this, whilst transforming, it does it equally on both sides. So we can sort of do this now to get an idea of how we want our tile or whatever to look like. What sort of angle? Maybe you want a really high angle for your isometric sort of pixel art. Maybe you want a really low angle. Whenever I'm working with pixel art, specifically, I like to use this angle, which is basically an angle of 2 pixels goes up. So you can see on my screen right now, every 2 pixels, it goes up. It's just a nice angle. It's pretty similar to like your standard sort of isometric angle. I like to use this. You can choose whatever angle you want. I suggest choosing an angle that is sort of like a set degree of pixels. So rather than going sort of like 3, 2, 3, 2, it just sort of looks a bit ugly. Make it go up by 2 or by 3 or by 1 or by 4. Pick a solid number so you get like a nice clean edge. So now we basically have a platform for whatever we want to create now, and we've got a really good starting point. So let's say I'm going to make that little grass platform that you saw at the start of the video. What I can do now is just hit Control J. I'll turn off this top layer for now, and then now we've got a duplicate of this layer. I'm going to hit Control J again and just hit the arrow key down on my keyboard a couple times just to sort of move it down. I'm going to hit Control E. If you didn't know this, if you just got one layer selected and you hit Control E, it'll automatically merge the layer below it into that layer. Just a little sort of shortcut to save time. So if you can guess what I'm going to do now, I'm basically just going to keep hitting Control J, move it down, Control E, Control J, move it down. I'm just adding some height to this layer because this will basically be the dirt for that sort of cube. So I'm just duplicating it, whatever height, I think that's a good height there, and I'm going to move it to the bottom of my page. Now I need to make it look like dirt, so I'm going to double click on this layer. One thing that's funny about these color swatches here actually is I don't really have many browns. I don't really use any dirt in the game that I'm making. So let's just come up with our own dirt. So I'm going to create sort of like a, yep, I think that looks good there. Hit OK. So I just added a color overlay. Now we're going to duplicate it. Control J, go to my marquee tool or M in your keyboard, and I'm going to delete. Go back into the layer style, and then I'm going to change the color overlay for this back layer to a sort of lighter brown. So something like this. Yeah, let's say that's good. Okay. And then now we've got the both sides to our cube. I'm just going to select them, merge them. So now if I turn on this grass layer again, you can see we have a nice little cube. So I'm just going to move that down a bit. And then I'm just going to add a color overlay to this and make it one of these nice grass colors that we have here. Let's pick this color. Cool. So we now have a grass cube, isometric in pixel art. It's amazing. Yeah, you might want to fix up the bottom if yours is like mine, but just for tutorial purposes, it looks good. So now what we're going to do is I'll add sort of like a little edging to the grass, some highlights. So, you know, whenever you're doing pixel art, you want to sort of usually have your medium color, so your sort of base color, highlight color, and then a shadow color. Usually you tend to stick between 3 colors for most sort of objects. So for example, and then sometimes 4, but it depends. So hard to explain, but let's say that here's this grass panel here, and it's just facing upwards. So I'll just pick like a highlight color, which would be this lighter sort of green. And then on this highlight color, I'm just going to draw some sort of lines around the edge, and then I'll pick a shadow, which is the darker green, and we go like that. So now we have a highlight, and I think I hit the blue instead, but the blue looks really cool. No, it just looks like that. Cool. So we got our shadow and our highlight. So it's basically like a sort of like a 3-tone sort of grass here. With this dirt, we have a highlight side and a shadow side. It's not just one panel like the grass. So I'll pick one color for the highlight here. So let's pick like a nice sort of, yeah, whatever, an orange. And then you could highlight with the orange, and then with this, the darker side, you can maybe pick a darker color and then do some shadows of that. So, or highlights of that, whatever you want. So there you go. We've got some cube. You can choose to sort of highlight, do whatever you want with that. Like I said, I don't really have any dirt colors in this color palette, so you might just have to sort of construct the colors yourself for the dirt. But we've got some simple grass here. Now let's actually create a little house. So we can just follow the exact same sort of guides as what we just did. I might do it manually. So I'm just going to go back to my brush tool. Let's select a nice sort of gray, light gray, and I'm going to just start sort of making these little 2-pixel increments. So this is the angle that I chose for my pixel art. Whatever angle you did, just sort of recreate that angle. So I'm just going in here, doing little 2-pixel lines. And now what I'm going to do is do exactly what I did with the graphs. Hit Control J, Control T, flip it horizontal, drag it to this side. You want to make sure it lines up, so our edge sort of lines up with the bottom of the grass here, which it does. And then I'm going to Control J and Control T and right click and flip vertical. It's a lot of commands to remember, but I trust you guys, you can do it. And then we're just going to select all these layers, Control E to merge again. So we just made this little square in the center of our grass. And we can follow the exact same thing now. This is something to really remember whenever you're using Photoshop in general, but especially for pixel art, because it can be pretty tedious and time consuming. So you want to do whatever you can to save time. And that's really important. You don't want to spend all day doing something when there could be a much more efficient way. So to do this, I could sort of manually go in and fill all the thing, or I could just do exactly what I did before, Control J, move that up, Control E, Control J, move it up, and you can keep sort of doing this process where you're just duplicating it and moving it up until you, whatever, height that you like for the house is good. You're going to pick that height. That thing in the middle's annoying me. So there we go. Now we have our house. Now I can just go back to the marquee tool, or M on my keyboard, select half of it, Control J to duplicate, color overlay. Let's pick a nice dark gray. Yeah, why not? Let's pick this gray here. Okay. And bam, we have the start of a cube. So let's just do the top of this cube. So we can just let's pick a nice light gray, something like that. Yep, that looks good. And then now we can just do the same sort of line down, following the 2 pixels. So sometimes if you hold shift, you can sort of guess it. Sometimes you might have to do it manually, but usually what I do whenever I'm sort of just like freehanding lines like this, and I want them to go, at the specific grid, I'll just freehand it and then I'll just edit it after I freehanded it. So I've got that now. Now I'm just going to duplicate it like I've done with everything else, flip it. I did this on the same layer as the gray, whatever. So let's just try and do that. So we've got pretty close there, like that, and then we just want to cut it in here. So that's what I meant before, is sometimes you just have to sort of find a happy medium between freehanding and doing it yourself. So get this, color that in. That's good enough. Let's just pretend that all lines up perfectly, which it doesn't, but it's good enough. And then I'm just going to color this all in. If you didn't see what I did there, I just control clicked on the main cube, so I can just fill in this top layer a bit easier. I don't have to go perfectly around the edge. I can just fill all that in like that. Bam, we have a cube. It's actually not lined up properly. Let's ignore that. Let's pretend it does line up properly. Actually, no, I can't do it. It's hurting my brain too much. I'm just going to really quickly push those pixels out. Okay, now it lines up. So we have a cube and we have some grass. Awesome. So let's make a roof. So what we want to do now, let's make a new layer. Now I'm just going to go for a nice blue. Let's have a blue roof on this thing. So I'm going to basically follow this line that we just did on the side of the house, and perfect. So it's really nice when you do that, when it just goes the exact angle you want. Now I'm just going to pick the midline of the roof. So I think this is the midline, drag that up a bit, and then I'm just going to shift click between these points so we get the angle of the roof. And then what we can do again is Control J, copy this roof over to the other side of the house. I think it should sit like that. Yep. And then now we can start sort of filling it in. So I'm going to pick a nice light blue. I'm just going to go into a new layer, so don't go over the top of this. And then I'm basically going to be control clicking a little box in between all these, and then I'm going to fill it with a paint bucket tool. Bam. And we have one side of our roof. Create a new layer again. Let's create the sort of the shadow side over here. So I'm just shift clicking in between all these points that I've created. Bam. And then paint bucket. This side should be a little bit lighter actually, because it is on the top of the roof. So let's add a color overlay and let's make that sort of medium blue color. Yeah, that'll do. And then we've got to do this last little side here. I'm just going to fill this in manually. Pick the dark blue, get that. Sometimes when you do the shift click, it doesn't always sort of perfectly do it. So you may have to sort of fix it up. But now we have a little roof. So you basically, whenever you're doing pixel art, you just want to make sure that it lines up as best as possible for the sort of the main stuff. So it was important that this bottom of the roof was at the right angle, but with these sort of side things, you can just sort of eyeball it if you want. It doesn't always have to be perfect. That's something that is really, really important when you're doing this sort of work, is everybody really concentrates on making it absolutely pixel perfect. Every angle lines up exactly. It doesn't have to. It really doesn't have to. Whatever looks good is fantastic. Go with that. So yeah, now we've got a little house, and we could just do the exact same thing like we did with the grass. If I wanted to add some sort of brickwork textures in here, maybe I'd pick a lighter color, and I could sort of, maybe not that gray, maybe this here. And I could go in here and then sort of make some like little brick patterns or something, look like they're coming out of the stone. So you could go in now and then add all sorts of little details. I could add some more highlights over here, look like this sort of bricks coming in. I'm just really quickly doing this, so don't expect it to look like, you know, some amazing artwork. But yeah, and then you could go in with your highlights. I could maybe do a highlight along this little edge here, maybe another highlight along this edge here. It's always important to sort of choose where your sun's coming from and stick with it. So obviously my sun's coming from the top left, so all my highlights are going to be on the top left, on this left face and on the top face as well. So I got a little house here. Let's start making a tree. So I'm just going to go with the same brown colors I did with this grass for a tree. So I'm going to create a new layer. If you didn't know, whilst you select it on your brush, you can also hold down Alt and it turns into a color picker. It's really useful. If you didn't know that, I probably just changed your life. And then I'm just going to use my bracket keys just to scale up my brush a little bit here. And I'm just going to draw a tree trunk. So let's just draw a cool little tree trunk. Going over here. So yep. And then I'm going to hold Alt again, click on this light brown. Like you saw before, you could actually hold Control, click on a layer, it selects the edge pixels of that layer. So instead of having to sort of perfectly go around the edge and line it up, now it forces me to do that. So I can just go around the side of this tree now and do my sort of highlight. So I've got these little roots here, make sure to highlight them like that. That looks pretty good. And bam, we've got a tree. So I'm going to do a branch coming out over here like that. Maybe I'll add a little highlight on the edge of that branch too. That looks pretty good. And then let's do some leaves. So create a new layer. I'm going to pick this dark green. I'm going to do some bunchy sort of leaves coming over here. Obviously, like I'm just filming this as a tutorial. I don't have all the time in the world. So I hope that you guys would spend a lot more time than what I am and you could really make it look awesome. So if you're complaining about mine doesn't look like an absolute work of art, I'm trying to do it as quickly as possible. Give me a break. So yeah, now I'm just going to fill in some leaves. Again, Control click, and let's start doing some shading. So remember, our light source is coming from sort of the top left. So I'm basically just going to be drawing sort of semicircles from the top left. So we're making this little sort of curved sort of section on the bottom of all the different parts of the tree that is the shadow. So I'm just going to go in here like this. So you can see there's sort of like this crescent sort of part that I've got going on where all the sort of different section of leaves have this little shaded part like this. I'll do it here as well. Okay. I think that's looking pretty good for now. So obviously you could make it look way better if you had more time. And then I'm going to get the highlight color as well. And then we'll do some sort of circles in the center for some highlights. Like here, it is a tree, so you want to make it look sort of puffy. So make sure these highlights are sort of rounded, if that makes sense. And then maybe we could do some little spots sort of off the place to make it look like it's got some sort of leaves coming out. It's got a little bit of texture. This, I might do that with that sort of shade green as well. Do a little bit of texture. And then bam, we have a little tree. And we did that really quickly. So obviously it doesn't look as amazing as the example at the start, but you can sort of get the gist of what I'm doing. I would probably stick to usually a base sort of color. Your base color, a shadow, and then a highlight. And it'll probably make your life a lot easier when you're just sort of starting out pixel art to just stick with those three colors. And then if you want to go into more detail and depth, you can do more stuff. But for a tree, basically, you can make a really awesome looking tree with just three colors, and that's it, and it'll look awesome. So usually, in general, try and stick to your base color, a highlight, and then a shadow. And then just quickly before I wrap this up, I'm going to give you a little tip as far as choosing those colors. So something that can look really cool to sort of maximize that retro pixel art look and just make your color pop a lot more. You may not have noticed this because you might be using my color palettes, which already sort of exist. But if you actually change the hue of the color, depending if it's a highlight or a shadow, it can really make it pop. So this tree is a perfect example. If I select the shadow color here, let's put that down. So if I go to the color swatch, you can see this shadow is basically like a turquoise. It's almost a blue. Now if I select this mid-tone and draw a little line, and then we'll go to the color swatch, it's a bit more green now. It's not as less blue, and we're going a bit closer towards the green. And now if I select this highlight color, and we'll go to the color swatch, now we're sort of in the middle of the green. So what, and you could even make that more. You could probably drag that close to a yellow, and it would exaggerate the effect even more. So what this creates is a really cool sort of popping effect, where basically your shadows are a bit cooler. You always sort of edge them towards blue, and then your highlights, you always make them a little bit warmer, so you edge them towards sort of yellow. Same with the roof here. So maybe this blue, I would make it a bit more of a warm blue since it's a highlight, so I'd drag it a bit more of a turquoisey color. With this deep blue, I'd make it a bit more purpley. So if you do that sort of coloring for all your pixel art, it will really make it pop, and it's going to look amazing. So that's just something just to remember. But yeah, in general, with pixel art, it's really just time. So I could spend, a whole lot of time now adding in detail. You really just need to know the basics and how to sort of create the isometric shapes, how to line it up, how to use the brush tool, how to use all those basic things. Once you got that down, the world's your oyster. You can just go for it. It's basically how much time you put in is what you're going to get out of it. So if you make any cool pixel art from this tutorial, tweet it at me, post a link in the comments or whatever. I'd love to see it. I think my Twitter's in the description, so tweet me a picture of your pixel art. I'd love to see what you all create. And as always, if you have any ideas for future tutorials or anything like that, be sure to let me know in the comments. I love all of your feedback. I'm always trying to figure out ideas for new tutorials, so it really helps me out when you guys help me out with that. So, like always, I hope you have an amazing day, everybody. It's been Julian of Flow Graphics. See ya.